Well, thank you so much. I'm privileged to be asked to come and speak this evening. So thank you so much for inviting me here to talk. As Claire said, my name is Megan. I'm an occupational therapist. I work with Neurodiversity Ireland. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Neurodiversity Ireland now in a moment. But today I'm going to talk mainly about an occupational therapy perspective of play and a little bit of play, one of the kind of play theories that we use in occupational therapy to understand play. And then I'm going to talk a bit about neurodivergent play and what that might look like and how that might be different from neurotypical play. So here is the agenda for this evening. And I'm just going to kick off. So I'm just going to move this screen in a second. So very, very quickly, I'm just going to clarify terms that you'll hear me using throughout today's webinar. These might be very, very familiar to you already, but we always like to start our presentations with just a quick run through these. So, of course, neurodiversity refers to all of the different types of brains that people in the world can have. And I suppose that's the overarching term for all brain types. And then under that, we can have, neurotypical brains. And really, these are just the majority brain types. So they're considered typical in terms of how they interpret and respond to the world. Some people might also say neuromajority, but it's just the most amount of brains, I suppose, are considered neurotypical. And then under neurodiversity, then, of course, we also have neurodivergent brain types. And these are really just a minority brain type, and they're classified as being different in some way to neurotypical brains in their processing, their interpretation, communication, responses, things like that. And so this would include many different brain types or neurotypes, but things like autistic brains, ADHD, dyspraxic, dyslexic, to name only a few. And some people may prefer to say, neurominority. Some people also like to say neurodistinct, or lots of adults now are calling themselves neurospicy or spicy, which is quite nice. And I suppose just to say that this language and the language you'll hear me use today is widely accepted at the moment, but this might look different in the future. It's kind of a quickly evolving area, as we know, and we're learning more and more from the neurodivergent communities about their preferred language. So perhaps this will look different in the future, but this is kind of accepted at the moment. Who are we? So Neurodiversity Ireland is a charity that's founded by neurodivergent parents of neurodivergent children. And these parents saw significant gaps in the services and in their communities and in the kind of understanding of neurodiversity in their communities and across Ireland. And things like, large waiting lists for services and supports, lack of school places and leisure and extracurricular places as well for their kids. And I suppose feeling like their children were unwanted in their communities and being excluded. And they wanted to do something about this. So we have a sensory centre in Blackrock, which is our kind of temporary space. We've been there though for about 2 years, where we run various after school groups run by myself and my colleague Jack, who's also an OT, and Tamara, our sensory centre manager, and CJ, who's our communication specialist. And really our groups are kind of a fully inclusive space for neurodivergent children to come and engage in the occupation of play. So our centre has lots of amazing equipment and sensory equipment and play opportunities for children to come and meet kids who play like them. And it's very, very child-led and demand-free. And it's just a lovely space for children where they hopefully feel like they can belong and be themselves authentically. And we are a neurodiverse workforce and board. So there's multiple different neurotypes on our team and on our board, which brings lots of kind of creative thinking and ideas to the table. And then we run camps for neurodivergent children as well outside of school terms. So we'll be running, I think it could be like 16 camps this summer, 2 a day for 8 weeks. So we're in our kind of crazy planning mode at the moment for that. And then we do some work in schools, and we're kind of committed to the advocacy side of supporting the neurodivergent community. So we do kind of education pieces in schools, and we do trainings and workshops and things like that as well. So that's who we are. And I suppose I've said already about some of the issues that I think we're all quite familiar with in regards to our disability services in Ireland and some of the failures that they have in regards to supporting neurodivergent children and families. So we have a vision of what we feel disability services could and should look like, and that includes a community integrated space that's inclusive, where all kids can go to get supports they need, and that they're also celebrated for the strengths that they bring as well. And then I suppose what's really central to the work that we do is that we want to be informed by the neurodivergent community and kind of centering the voices of the neurodivergent community in the services that we provide. So it's a little bit about us. And then I won't go super deep into this, but just to kind of give a little bit of background around, neurodiversity and neuroaffirmative approaches. I suppose neurodiversity has always existed. Diverse brains have always been around. This is not something that's new, but and I suppose being neurodivergent is a very natural part of human diversity, and in fact is a very valuable part of human diversity. And it's not something that needs to be, I suppose, changed or altered, and we should be celebrating these types of differences and the unique perspectives that people with different brain types can bring. A neuroaffirmative approach, that's kind of the kind of overarching piece of the work that we do, but really that's just having a more supportive, hopeful, encouraging outlook on being neurodivergent and on neurodiversity, as opposed to a medical model looking at fixing people and labeling people as disordered. That would not really align with our values. And I suppose just to say, and I'll talk a little bit more obviously about neurodivergent play today, but we like to think instead of, developmental delays and disordered development, instead we like to think about unique developmental trajectories, and children develop the way that they are supposed to in the brains and bodies that they have and who they are. So it's more about unique trajectories instead of disordered. And then we really want to be valuing authenticity and being one's authentic self and being comfortable to bring that into the world, as opposed to valuing neurotypical norms and standards for, things like play, which we'll talk about today. And I've said already that neurodivergent people do not need to be changed or cured. They are not disordered. They just have a brain that is a minority brain type. Okay, so it's just a little bit of that background. And then occupational therapy. I mean, you may have come across occupational therapists before, but just one or two points on this, which is just that OT is a healthcare profession that offers support to people with, physical, psychological, medical, social differences and disabilities. And we're all about supporting and enabling people to live their life to the fullest. And that's really about what's meaningful to that person or group of people. And we help people to find ways to do the things that they want and need to do in their lives. And occupation describes all the meaningful activities people want, need, or are expected to do. And really what's important about occupation is that is what gives meaning to our lives. It gives us our identity and purpose to the life that we have. And then for children in particular, of course, I know you touched on this, Claire, as well, play really is children's main occupation, which is why it's so important for us to kind of understand play and know how to support that, especially for our neurodivergent kids. And moving on then to play itself. So play, of course, it's widely accepted, as I said, that play is the ultimate occupation for children. And we like to say that it is a child's job to play. Play itself is something that is self-directed by the individual, is intrinsically motivating in that it's something that they want to do. And of course, it is something that brings joy and is fun. And play is really all about the process itself of engagement and not about an end result. And of course, we all know here on this call that learning and development happens through play. And that is why play is so important. And, we often think of play as a developmental process that children need to progress through stage by stage. But really at its core definition, play is just about what brings joy to a person at this moment in time. So, and that's kind of, I think, really applicable when we talk about neurodivergent play. And as Claire said, children have a right to play according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children. So it really is very important. So with that kind of definition in mind, Let's kind of start thinking a little bit about play for neurodivergent children, and maybe asking ourselves some questions as a society, about our neurodivergent children being facilitated to access the same opportunities for play as their neurotypical peers, given that their play might look different. Are their play needs different, and are we accounting for this in our work, and how are we doing that? Are we sometimes trying to change or alter neurodivergent play? And then if we are doing that in our work, then are we really truly supporting access to play itself? And then do we actually value, neurodivergent play even when we don't really fully understand it? And I'm going to talk a bit more about that as well. And I suppose traditional approaches towards neurodivergent children and their play may typically have been aimed, towards altering that play to appear more neurotypical, and to meet those kind of neurotypical norms for development and age expectations. But I would really would like to think about that and kind of the impact of that, and if that's really truly supporting play for neurodivergent children. And we've maybe been a little bit overly focused on the past as what could be deemed as functional play, and that this might have been coming from a good place. But we really want to be listening to the neurodivergent community, and we are doing that more and more. But there's so much more to learn, I suppose, from the neurodivergent community when we talk and think about their play. Okay, I'm going to take another drink of water. So a small piece on the history of play, because we know that play hasn't always been seen the way that it is today. So, such as times as in the industrial era and times like that, play was often viewed as a distraction and as unimportant compared to work, which was considered the more valuable use of time and the more valuable occupation. And children were, expected to contribute to this alongside adults, and leisure, I suppose, was not really prioritised. And then in the kind of early 20th century, we began to see a shift in understanding of the value of play. And we began to kind of reframe play as something that's essential, not just as a luxury, but as a core part of child development. And we now have so much more understanding about this and about the kind of importance and need of play. And then kind of fast forwarding to today, as I said, play is recognised as a right for children. And we now know that play is essential, not just for fun, but for mental health, emotional regulation, self-expression, connection with others, and all these other lovely goals that we have for our kids. And we know that play is how children make sense of the world around them and of themselves and their own self-identity. So why does play theory matter? Play theory, I suppose, gives us a structure or a template for understanding how children play across different cultures, neurotypes, abilities, backgrounds, and it helps us see patterns in play. So not just what children are doing, but what that tells us about how they're feeling, connecting, and growing. And when we use a framework to support a child's play, we can better understand their experiences and support them to be, authentically themselves, and not kind of judged or told how they should play. And then I suppose the way we, look at play shapes how we understand and support it. So the image here just kind of is to represent the metaphor that, we may have heard it before. If a stranger collapses in a crowd, a cardiologist suggests they might be having a heart attack. A neurologist suggests they could be having a seizure. A nurse suggests they could have low blood pressure. A dietitian suggests it's malnutrition. Each of them is trained to see the world in a certain way, and they bring their own lens and experience to that. And their lens shapes their interpretation of the situation and their understanding. So in the same way, in multidisciplinary teams, each professional brings their own lens to the understanding of a child, and that's really valuable, and it helps us build a more holistic picture. But we also benefit from a shared language or lens, and that's kind of where a play theory or model might come in for today. So I've chosen to talk about Bundy's model of playfulness, which is an occupational therapy model of play. I'm not going to go super deep into it. I'm just going to touch on kind of the main components of that. And then you'll hear me kind of use the same language later on when I talk about neurodivergent play. So hopefully it ties in together. But this model emphasizes how play is not just an activity, but is a fundamental aspect of child development. And again, it's not about the outcome or end product. It's about the spirit of play, the process of play. And Bundy's model talks about flow, where, you know, a child enters a state of flow when they're truly engaged. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later as well. And kind of Bundy's model helps us tune into that internal experience of play. And when we understand that, we can hopefully better understand the children that we're supporting, and support their access to the kind of play that is meaningful and joyful to them. So there are three main components to play according to Bundy's model. So we have intrinsic motivation, perception of being in control, and ability to suspend reality. And there's kind of you can see on the image, there's sort of like a scale that it tips. So hopefully, you know, the experience the child is having is tipping in those three areas to play. And when it's not, it's just a good way to identify, I suppose, when a situation might not be play for a child. And I might talk a little bit more about that too, but just to touch on intrinsic motivation. So with intrinsic motivation, the key factor here is that play is where the child plays for the sake of play itself. I feel like I'm going to say play about 1 million times on this webinar. But it was, so intrinsic motivation is, you know, they're not playing for external rewards, pressure, praise, or outcomes that are external to them. So if a child is doing an activity for its own sake, they are said to be intrinsically motivated, as opposed to if they are doing it for a reward or something external. In that case, they are extrinsically motivated. And that kind of tips it away from being a true play experience, I suppose. And when someone's intrinsically motivated, they'll persist through challenges to continue the activity because of genuine engagement and enjoyment if it's internally motivated. And yeah, the more intrinsically motivated a child is, the more likely the activity is to be playful. And then perception of control. So this is where the child directs and controls the play activities. This is a key part of an experience being play. So they're making decisions about what, how, and with whom to play. They have autonomy over the play experience. So for example, they choose what materials to engage with, how to use them in the form of play. It doesn't matter what those materials are. They control the pace, the flow of the game. They define the boundaries of the game and the play. And this control, I suppose, of the play experience supports self-regulation and identity exploration and decision-making skills. And it's a really important part, as we know, for kids who are engaging in a play experience. And if the control of a child's play and the direction is coming from external sources, this does reduce the kind of playfulness, like it tips it over towards that other side of the scale. But children can co-control and negotiate play experiences, though, together once the dynamics suit both the children's, or multiple children's kind of thresholds and need for control in that moment. And then ability to suspend reality. So the child engages or has opportunity to engage in pretend or imaginary or make-believe scenarios, or to modify rules and things like that. This might include role-playing, creating imagery worlds, symbolic play, manipulating components of reality to suit a play narrative, blending reality and imagination for fun, and the exploration of concepts. And this freedom kind of allows children to explore abstract thinking, creativity, and emotional expression. And it also helps them practice social roles and navigate complex kind of social and emotional experiences as well in a low stakes way. And I'm going to talk later about neurodivergent imaginative and suspending reality play, I suppose, which traditionally may have been misinterpreted or dismissed because it's likely that it looks quite different than neurotypical imaginary play. So when we're supporting access to play for the kids that we meet, we kind of want to consider, as I said, these components and how they tip the scale towards play, and being mindful if a specific scenario is leaning the child towards non-play. And even just being conscious of this can be beneficial because, as we know, we can use play as a tool to teach a skill, which is an absolutely valid way to teach a skill to a child. And there's lots of strong evidence to prove that that's a really helpful way of teaching a new skill. But just being conscious that that does remove some of the kind of control and motivation pieces a little bit, or it can do. And therefore, it can be a playful interaction, but it might not necessarily be like authentic full play in itself. So that's just something to be mindful of if we're really trying to provide opportunities for authentic, real play, that's a slightly different thing. And really, we want to be less skill focused when we're talking about play, more concerned with authenticity and fun, and that child is emotionally regulated and regulated from a sensory perspective as well, and feeling safe and connected. And again, just to reiterate that the model really emphasises that piece of play being a fundamental aspect of child development. And Bundy's model really, it's just a kind of a nice way to help us interpret the play of children we're observing and maybe understand it a little bit more, and give us more understanding of that play experience. I'm not going to go too much into this because I don't want to waste lots of time, but I always like to just caveat, because some of the theories, models and tools that we use in our work may have been created in times where there was less understanding of neurodiversity. And although I think Bundy's model is a really lovely way to look at play, there are some components of it that might not fully align with a neuro-affirming approach. I won't go through all of them, but even some of the things, there is some pieces in it about evaluating or measuring play. I would say that you can't really measure someone else's play, but you can have a deeper understanding of it. And really, that's just a kind of language piece, but I think that that's important. But look, I'm going to skip through these. I won't go through them, but just to kind of caveat that as well. Okay, so now I'm going to look more into neurodivergent play. And to start off with, I'm just going to do a few comparisons of, I just picked a few kind of components of play that might be different for neurotypical and neurodivergent children. So I'm kind of calling it maybe traditional and non-traditional play, or neuromajority play and neurominority play styles. Of course, these are big generalizations. There are children across both neurotypical and neurodivergent neurotypes who, don't meet all the things in these categories and might cross over, but it's just a general kind of understanding. So neurotypical children, typically their social play is more focused on the face-to-face aspect, the kind of conversation piece of that social play interaction, whereas a neurodivergent child, their social play might be more side-by-side and is typically more activity focused. So the kind of the positive social piece comes through a shared engagement in a shared interest or activity, and they might prefer solo play or parallel play or being an onlooker to other children's play, or their social play might be for shorter periods of time, kind of interspersed with solo play in between, and really it's just to say that is okay. It's absolutely valid to socialize differently and to have preferences for how to socialize, and so that's absolutely valid. But from a play perspective, you might see that in some of the children that you work with, that maybe that social piece for them comes from that side-by-side activity focused scenario. We actually had a teen in one of our OT groups who goes to my colleague Jack's group, who came to our groups and played a Connect 4 game with one of the other teens in the group, and they didn't speak for the whole hour. They just played Connect 4 together for a whole hour. There was no conversation, and when he was picked up by his parent, he said, "Oh, I've made my first friend." So to somebody else observing that might look like, oh, they're not even interacting there, but they were very much connected through that shared enjoyment in that game and activity. And I think that's really, really lovely, and a really nice way to kind of look at that. And then when it comes to imaginative play, neurotypical play might more frequently include that kind of imaginative role play, pretending to be a superhero, all that kind of stuff. Whereas for a neurodivergent child, they absolutely may engage in deep imaginative worlds, and they might have unique rules in the worlds that they create. They can have highly creative, imaginative constructs, but they just might be structured differently, such as through like detailed fantasy systems and things like that. Or their imaginative play, their play, sorry, might be more focused on concrete ideas and real life. So it might involve more scripting or reenacting of real life situations that they've been in or observed. Lots of the kids that we work with, like their imaginative play is scripting TV scenarios or movie scenarios and kind of exploring that. Neurotypical children might like variety in their play, and they might execute games differently, differently and at different times. Whereas neurodivergent children might have strong play routines, and they might find comfort in repetition during play and in the predictability of a play routine. And this might be very self-regulating for them. So that can be kind of a difference we might see. Some of the kids we use kids we see will use the same play routine over and over, and that brings them a lot of joy and feelings of comfort and safety. Neurotypical children might have lots of interests, which might change or adapt over time, and these interests might vary in intensity. Whereas neurodivergent children usually have strong passions and specific interests that they like to learn and explore very deeply. So they might have fewer but stronger passions and interests. And these interests often bring them a high degree of enjoyment, and typically they can focus on these really well as well. Neurotypical children might enjoy sensory play and sensory exploration, but typically this isn't a central component of their play, or if it is, it's less so. So the kind of sensory aspects are often secondary to the social or imaginative kind of context, whereas for neurodivergent children, their play may very much center a sensory experience. So they might be, sensory seeking through play, such as messy play and tactile play, liking visual stimulation, and kind of exploring the visual components of things or sounds. They might like movement and input to their body through play, or they might be sensory avoidant. And so the sensory component is very important because they might need the right sensory environment in order to play. So yeah, I suppose the sensory experience itself might be a form of play for them. And then just to reiterate that this, neurodivergent play and these differences are not disordered or less than, and they don't need to be altered necessarily to fit, neurotypical norms. It just might be and look differently. But the central needs, I suppose, of all children's all neurotypes for children, the central needs remain the same, which is, having fun, having control of the play experience, being motivated, something that brings joy, and all these kind of overarching commonalities. And then this is just a slide that kind of reiterates some of what I've already talked about, so I won't go into all of them again, but and some of this, just to say, is inspired by Andy Putt, Mrs. Beachy-P's webinar on autistic play, which is really nice, and she speaks really nicely about neurodivergent and autistic play in particular. But just to say, that neurodivergent children play might have that kind of alternative developmental trajectory that I talked about earlier, and it might not kind of follow through those like typical or majority milestones of play and through these expected phases. And so they might develop different play at kind of different times and in different orders. Or they might stick with one type of play or two types of play for a very long time, or maybe forever, I don't know. And that's absolutely okay. And we're allowed to accept that, and that is very valid. So the next few slides are some photographs of some children that we work with in our centre, and some family photos that have been kindly shared with us, depicting different types of play and action. I think it just speaks louder than words to kind of show this kind of thing in action. So here we can see some examples of neurodivergent social interactive play that is activity focused, and the children, as you can see, are more side by side as opposed to head on and engaged in a back and forth conversation. But they are still, of course, engaging in a meaningful social experience with their peers by parallel playing or sharing a play space together. These kids likely feel safe and comfortable with each other in these scenarios, and therefore feel connected with each other, such as that example that I even, that I talked about a couple of minutes ago. And what's really important when we're thinking of social play is that this type of connection is happening in a very naturalistic, intrinsically motivated way. And the interactions are not being forced by an adult, to kind of force kids to socialize with each other. It's just happening in a naturalistic way. And so we're really maintaining that sense of control, which maintains that sense of playfulness. We know that all kids want to connect with each other or to connect with other children and adults. They just, neurodivergent children just might connect in different ways to their neurotypical peers. And, I always like to give the example as well, even for adults. I mean, sitting down with friends or family members to watch a movie together is an activity focused side by side social interaction. So we can compare that for the kids that we support as well. And then the photo on the right, I suppose, is just lots of the kids in our centre love to connect with their peers through jumping into our ball pit together and through rough and tumble play, because they love all that type of sensory input. And so these children might not exchange, spoken language. Some of them are speaking and some are non-speaking, but they are still practicing without even realizing it. They are practicing things like turn taking, waiting, learning boundaries of my friends, navigating social interactions, and all these other skills that we really want our kids to learn. But it's happening in a very naturalistic way through this kind of shared enjoyment in this activity. And it's also sensory driven as well, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide. So as I said, many of the kids we meet seek play opportunities with strong sensory components, or that center the sensory experience. So really we want to be allowing neurodivergent children to explore their senses if that's something that's motivating and brings them joy. And we can kind of help support that authentic play by providing sensory rich environments and thinking about the toys and space that we're offering and equipment, if that's available to us, to make it kind of sensory inclusive. And I suppose sensory play doesn't just involve messy play, although lots of the kids that we work with do really love immersive, tactile sensory experiences, and that brings them lots of joy. But sensory play involves all the senses. So the little girl in the middle, getting her movement and her proprioceptive input. It can be, like I said earlier, visually finding joy from items that move and watching lights and things like that. So if we are thinking of kind of increasing access to sensory play opportunities for children who we think, we want to try that out with, just to try not just sensory play, to kind of look at those other senses as well. And then here we have kind of another component of neurodivergent play, which is that it might involve non-traditional methods of using items or toys. And neurodivergent kids might use these, might use toys that they have, or might use items in their home in ways that they aren't typically used for, or they might use them in a way that they were not made to be played with. And they might be finding, I would say, creative ways to use toys in new ways and for new purposes. And traditionally, this type of play, I'm talking about things like lining up, arranging, sorting, that kind of play. And this may have been labelled traditionally as being non-functional, and not actually being play. But we know that that's absolutely not true, because this is bringing these kids joy. They have control over what they're doing. They're motivated to do it. And as I said, this might include lining things up, visually stimming with items, organising items, tossing items, arranging things. And we meet lots and lots of children who find much joy out of this type of play. And just to say as well that for all we know, this might be that child's way of, suspending reality or engaging in imaginative play. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but it's important to get into their world and kind of see what it is they might be getting out of this, and providing opportunities. If they like lining things up and sorting them out, let's just provide them with lots of ways to do that and let that kind of flourish. And I just really like this quirky picture on the right, which is one of the kids that I know who lined up potatoes, and I just think that's so sweet that she found joy out of doing that, and I just love it. So. And then, again, around repeated and routined, lots of the kids that, lots of neurodivergent children love repeated play ideas or routine play. And that's absolutely valid way to play. And this is just a little boy who last summer at camp came in, and we have like hundreds of these toy plastic animals, and they're like the most popular toy ever. So we keep having to get more and more. But this little boy was just creating this amazing line of all these animals, and it was so specific he was so specific how he was doing this. And every day of camp he came in and it got, more elaborate and longer, went in further parts of the room, and he loved that everyone would come over and comment on it, and like it was just such a lovely, joyful play experience for him. And part of that, a piece of that, was that it was this routine that was giving him joy and safety every day. And so that's just to show that. And then, often as well for our neurodivergent kids, the focus of their play, especially their imaginative play, might be on the setup versus neurotypical kids, which is usually on the execution of a storyline. For lots of the children that we see in our centre, and lots of adult and neurodivergent adults will talk about this in relation to their play as kids as well. It's really about creating these very specific scenarios where the characters and the pieces are all laid out, and these children can take a lot of time and effort into creating these and executing that setup. And so they might do it for like an hour and then only do like 2 minutes of acting out the storyline itself. But this is bringing a lot of joy, a lot of hyper focus. They are in control. It's very highly motivating. They are in flow, and they are suspending reality, I suppose, by creating this scene that is in their head. And so it is a very valid way of engaging in imaginative play. And it's also very impressive. Like, I think that photo on the bottom left, I don't know if you can see the detail, but it's like a classroom. It's got all the little paper books, and I just think it's amazing to see that, and to see kind of what can bring joy. And then a little bit more on imaginative play and how that might look different for our neurodivergent children. Lots of neurodivergent adults are sharing experiences about how their play was dismissed as not being imaginative when in fact it was, but people just didn't understand that it was imaginative play for them. So for lots of our kids, it might be that the imaginative scenario is happening inside their head, and not kind of as visible outwardly. Also, lots of the kids, lots of kids that we work with, and I'm sure you're meeting kids as well who are non-speaking. So we want to presume, we always presume their competence, but we don't know what they're thinking in their head if they're not expressing, and they don't yet have a way to communicate that to us. So it's important that we don't dismiss, they don't do imaginative play, because potentially they are. It might look like, the lining up of the toys and the moving around of the toys, and that's them executing an imaginative storyline. And so, we maybe just don't know. Lots of the kids, neurodivergent kids, their imaginative play, I think I said earlier, involves scripting and exploring kind of situations that from real life or from movies and videos and things like that. And that could be their imaginative play style, and that's completely valid. They're still exploring different, social experiences and things like that as well. So it still has those lovely benefits that we know imaginative play can have. And then the photo on the left of the magnet tiles, this is just one example from a recent one from one of my own groups. And it's a little boy, and he loves repeated play routines. And so he comes in every week for months. The first thing he does is take these magnet tiles out, and he spends time arranging them. He's been testing out, trying to make this perfect structure that's clearly been in his head. It's taken a few months to get there, because look, it's so impressive, right? It has like this tilt and everything. I think he might be an engineer when he grows up. And the design was getting more and more complex, and as he was kind of experimenting, and then he finally mastered what he obviously had in his head, which was this beautiful building. And then after honestly probably like 3 months of this, and then he finally executed this building, he actually told me the story of the building at that point, which was that at the top floor there's a disco happening, and there's people on the top floor in the kind of peak part, and they're dancing, and that bottom part is where is the offices where people are working. And he had actually got this whole kind of scenario in his head as to what was going on. I actually had no idea, and I know this kid actually quite well, but it was only, it took that amount of time that this was going on all the time, I suppose, for him, this lovely imaginative and creative piece, but maybe I just didn't recognize it until he kind of explicitly told me. So maybe we can apply that to our other kids whose play we don't fully understand. And then I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to flick myself on to talk a little bit about interest-based and then hopefully get through flow before I run out of time. But yes, interest-based play, I suppose, ties so strongly into the need for play to be intrinsically motivating. And we've lots and lots of examples from the work that we do of children who have really strong passions and interests. And focused interests also may be labeled as special interests. We just prefer focused interests or passions as language, but some people might use the terms special interests as well. They're so important, and they're often our gateway into connecting with our neurodivergent children in play. So like this child on the left here, was kind of tricky to kind of settle into camp. This was a year or two ago. He was going through a lot himself, and he really connected with this support staff member through kind of, she also loves Lego and he loves Lego, and she found this, and it really tapped it into this playful, joyful, social connection that they had, and his ability to kind of self-regulate and engage in the space. And it was really magical. And that really came through finding something that is a really focused interest. And he was able to do this for really long periods of time. And it was really, really lovely. Even our friend from a few slides ago, who was lining up the animals, he clearly loves animals and he loves books and things about animals, and that's just such a lovely way to connect with him. The photo on the right, on the bottom, is a child who really loves wheels and cars. And one day in group, he took apart all of the wheels from every like toy car and Lego car in our centre, which, as you can see, is a lot, and put them into our bouncy castle. And he had this whole idea of this game that he had, and he wanted to put them in the bouncy castle so that he could jump and roll around with all of them. And other kids thought it was hilarious as well, so they were joining in too. And yeah, it was just, I suppose, just to kind of emphasize the joy that a focused interest can bring to a child. And so we really don't want to be restricting their access to their focused interests, and really, we don't want to be using them either as rewards. We want to instead be incorporating this into their life and using it as a way for them to access authentic play and learning experiences, and not using it as a kind of carrot on a stick to, if you do this thing, you can get access to this, because they are central to many neurodivergent children and adults' lives. And then a little bit about flow. So flow, which is also talked about in Bundy's model, but it's kind of a widely understood concept, which is it's put forward by a person whose name I'm really not going to do justice, so it's on the screen. But he defined flow as a deep, effortless involvement in an activity in which the person loses a sense of self and time, and suggested that the best flow experiences occur when a child or adult engages in an activity that provides a level of challenge that matches their ability. And so flow is that kind of psychological state of deep focus and immersion in an activity. So, in a playful activity is, a child not feeling overwhelmed by the activity, but that the activity kind of brings enough challenge to their skills so they're not bored by it. And the concept really ties in so nicely with Bundy's model, because it's kind of guided by intrinsic motivation, where the child is fully immersed in the play, and has kind of experienced that sense of control, enjoyment, and timelessness, and kind of being geared at that just right level. But for many of our neurodivergent children, flow matters for any child who's engaging in a play experience, but especially for our neurodivergent children, because flow, of course, supports self-regulation. And we know that many of the neurodivergent children may find it easier to manage emotional or sensory overload when deeply engaged in flow in a preferred activity. Flow preserves autonomy and authenticity. Kind of more traditional models of adult-directed play can really disrupt flow and does not create an atmosphere for flow to occur. But allowing self-directed, unstructured play helps neurodivergent children kind of find their own rhythms and kind of find ways to participate or engage in flow. Flow builds intrinsic motivation. Flow experiences are inherently rewarding. Even thinking about being totally immersed yourself in a hobby or something that you really, really enjoy, it's such a mindful kind of rewarding feeling for yourself. And then, which is especially important for our neurodivergent learners who might feel kind of misunderstood in more kind of formal and structured educational settings and things like that. And then flow supports hyper-focus on interests and passions, what might have been traditionally labeled as a fixation or, restricted interests and things like that. I don't really like that language, but maybe that actually might be a child who's engaged in a flow state. And for that reason, then that kind of passion and engagement in an interest can actually serve as a very powerful tool for learning and connection when it's respected and when it's integrated into play. So supporting flow for our neurodivergent children. So I'm going to run through a couple of these because I'm just conscious of the time. But knowing how important flow is as part of a play experience for all kids and for neurodivergent kids in particular. Ideally, we want to avoid unnecessary redirection and interruptions when flow is happening, especially when our child is deeply engaged, because we've actually achieved something amazing if they are engaged in flow, and we've created hopefully this amazing opportunity for them to access this. So ideally, we don't interrupt it unless we absolutely have to. We want to, of course, we've talked about respecting non-traditional play. We want to offer enabling environments. So, for some kids that might be quiet, low sensory spaces. For other kids, it might be super stimulating environments where they can really get into an activity of movement that they really enjoy or whatever that might be. We obviously want to remove performance and praise pressures. They're not really conducive to flow. Flow flourishes without external evaluation or outcomes. And if we do need to support a child to transition out of flow because perhaps the day has ended or they need to go on the bus or whatever it is, we just want to maybe do that in a gentle, supportive and respectful way, maybe using visual and verbal cues to kind of prepare them for that transition, so that we're not kind of dysregulating that kind of regulating experience. And then ideally we just be flexible in the day as much as we can be. Is a child's flow in this current moment and the play and benefits they're getting from that maybe more important than the next activity that's on the schedule? And is there a little bit of flexibility sometimes to accommodate that? And then really, flow itself can be the goal. I think just like as an OT, we love flow. So how amazing, if we've created an opportunity where flow is happening. And I think just to kind of say that. And then this is just a couple of snapshot pictures of some children who are in flow, but also all the pictures, we've shown throughout are children who, lots of them were engaged in flow when they were kind of creating all these lovely things. And then I'm conscious of the time, Claire. I, of course, didn't keep time because I always go off notes. That's so I can pop to the maybe.
No, keep going, Megan. We're enjoying. Keep going.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going.
I'm actually nearly finished anyway, so just a couple of bullet points really to kind of finish with. People love that practical strategies. So I mean, that could be a whole training on its own, but just some things that we picked out, and I talked to my colleague Jack, and we kind of picked out a few practical strategies for kind of fostering that authentic play, as opposed, on top of what we've already talked about already. But some things we might do are observing. I think it's really important with neurodivergent children as well to take all the time we need to observe their play, and ideally observing without judgment and without assumptions as to what's happening. So going back to, the child who might be lining up, let's not assume they aren't. There isn't something more complex that's going on in their brain about this, or that let's assume that it is bringing joy if they're doing it. And try and just gather information about what they're doing, what might be bringing them some joy in this scenario or with these items, or how they're manipulating them or using them. We might follow them around. I mean, we have the benefits of a big centre where we work, so we might just follow the kids around for the first few sessions on and off to kind of see what they gravitate towards. Is there sensory experiences that they gravitate towards? Are there specific items and toys? Are they routined? And using those kind of understandings that I talked about already about neurodivergent play, and see if any of them apply here. We kind of feel in our centre anyway that it's always really important to maintain a preferred distance from the child, especially if they're new to us. Building that connection might take longer. And I think it's okay take some of that pressure off ourselves, that it's like, oh, I have to connect, I'm meeting this neurodivergent child for the first time. I have to be able to instantly connect with them and play with them. And I actually think it's really okay and more beneficial to just take space and really take the time to understand maybe what they're doing, but also to get them comfortable with you and know that you're a safe adult in their play environment, that you're not someone who's going to ruin or interrupt their game or enforce a different way of playing, that you're actually going to maybe be someone who can enhance this with them or find joy in it with them. And that might take some time. And so we always say, if a child, lots of the children that we work with are very happy to be very honest and blunt, which is great. So if we get any signal that our presence is not being well received in this moment, we will instantly honor that and say, okay, no problem, and leave them alone to solo play, and we'll try again later, or we'll try again another day. And actually what we have found with the benefit of time that we've had with lots of the kids is that by honoring that, we're really building a very trusting relationship, and then they're actually the kids that we end up being able to develop those really lovely rapports with, because they know that if they at any point ask me to leave, I will honor that. And there's a lot of that reduces a lot of stress and anxiety for those kids about me being involved or one of the other members of our team. So maybe just being in that child's vicinity is enough for a period of time to build that trust, that you are that safe person. And so maybe you don't even need to be like saying anything or doing anything. You're just present while they are engaging in something that is bringing them joy. And yeah, I've talked about that already. Maybe if they're ready or they're kind of more willing, you can parallel play with different items than they're playing with. If they don't like for you to be taking their items, that's absolutely fine. Lots of kids, and that's a whole thing on its own, but they might see a set of toys, it's being its full set. And so you taking some of that to play might really be interrupting that for them and might not be super joyful for them. So maybe you're playing with different items, but you're just in the same space, or you could be playing with the same thing with them, if they're happy for you to do that. And really, as well, we're just really not trying to direct the play in any direction. So like I could just go back to the lining up, because lots of kids there are quite a few kids who I know who like to line up and arrange. So maybe I'm just lining up and arranging near, and that can be very validating for a child who maybe has been in environments where no one plays like that, to see like, okay, I see what you're doing. I'm going to do that too. And even that can be quite validating from a self-identity point of view for our kids. And again, back to that kind of building trust. And then for our kids who are, more directly socially interactive, in terms of like they want you to be involved in their imaginary game and play, we would go along with the rules that those kids are creating for their game. And I think this really relates to that Bundy's model of control. But we'd really be following their lead. And if they, tell me I need to script a certain thing, I'm going to really try and do that for them, because I know that that's really validating, regulating, and joyful for them. And then again, just back to that thing of joy, like what is really bringing them joy. And maybe it is the kind of sensory, like jumping and bouncing and crashing around. And like, that's my in, I'm going to do that with you. So when I build trust with you, I'm going to, roll you over the peanut ball, or I'm going to help you jump into the thing. And like, that's my involvement. And I'm kind of enhancing this lovely sensory play experience. I'm sure this is all kind of stuff you already know, of course, but just to kind of reiterate, in the context of supporting neurodivergent play, we're going to get down to their level. For some of the kids that we work with, that might look like jumping up and down on something, or climbing on something, or lying across the furniture, across the floor, or just sitting. It very often does not involve a table and chairs, of course. And we would just mirror this to get on their level. And mirroring itself can be a really powerful tool as well in our toolbox. So kind of, especially for lots of our non-speaking kids and or minimally speaking kids, if they have gestalt, like if they have phrases that they script and things like that, we might repeat them back to them in playful ways, or imitate their body positions. Or if they're kind of, we've some kids who love like tossing things and throwing things in the air, we might do that as well and mirror them. And that can kind of like create like a connection between you and bring their interest to you. as part of that play experience, and kind of validate that. And I'm going to be really curious about what they are curious about. So I'm going to move with them around the room, follow their gaze. If they're visually kind of looking at items and stimming from them, I'm going to maybe do that too and find out, okay, do they maybe like the light, the shadow, the colors, the movement? What do they like about this? And then I can maybe provide more offerings that offer similar types of input maybe the next time we meet to kind of enhance that play experience for them. And then matching their energy levels, always really important. So some of our kids come in and they're like maybe, are ADHD and things like that, and they have lots of energy. So I'm going to try and match that and be on the same level with them to engage with them, and kind of follow their lead through that. Or if they're quieter and more solo player, then I'm obviously not going to come in all guns blazing. I'm going to kind of follow their lead and their energy. And what's really important for lots of the kids that we meet is that piece of embracing silence, which is actually harder sometimes, I think, than it sounds. But sometimes it's better to not say anything for multiple times, the first few times you're meeting a child, especially if they are a non-speaker or only sometimes speak, that embracing kind of that silence can be really powerful. Or for lots of our children, they really love tone of voice and intonation, so you might use an attention grabbing voice, and use repeated phrases and things like that. And really, like, all of this is just to say, we're going to try and find the fun in what they're doing, to validate their play experiences, and play preferences, and to be able to kind of enhance them by providing more offerings and opportunities for that to happen. And if you're not enjoying the experience, then possibly they're not as well. So let's try and find the kind of joy. And then I'm going to not go through this today, because I just want to kind of finish on this point. There's a really nice autistic OT, Sarah Salvaggi Hernandez. She's in the States, but she is a guest on a podcast I really love, called Two Sides of the Spectrum. But one of the episodes she did really early on, and it just always kind of landed with me or stayed with me. She talks really beautifully about autistic play and imaginary play. So I definitely recommend, if anyone is interested in understanding this more, to go and listen to that. But I really liked her piece. She talks really nicely about, the thing that we can do most is simply just let an autistic person play, or let a neurodivergent person play. And she kind of talks really eloquently about trusting the process of play itself for neurodivergent kids, and letting them explore their play authentically without that kind of pressure to conform, for us to try and change it or restrict it or make it meet a developmental neurotypical norm. And it's actually kind of hard sometimes to just kind of trust that process, but we know that it can have all these lovely benefits because we're hopefully supporting that really authentic play. And yeah, all play is valid, and there is no one right way to play. And then I'm going to stop talking. So thank you so much for listening to me.